Sleep is a global brain event, and in fact, one might argue that because sleep is the product of so many interactions with the brain, good sleep could be thought of as a metric of good brain health. In fact, many areas of the brain are actually more active during sleep than they are during the awake state. Now, much of sleep research over the past 60 years or so has defined sleep basing upon its EEG. And you can define different sleep states like slow wave sleep or rapid eye movement sleep. And that's all been sort of put together to describe the REM and non-REM sleep-wake cycle. And that's been a very interesting sort of descriptive process, but it hasn't really told us what's actually going on within the brain. Time of day really matters. We are very different creatures across the 24-hour day. Let's now move to the most obvious of our 24-hour oscillations, which is sleep. Across our lifespan, 36% of our lives will be spent asleep. Now, that's a huge amount of time. And if sleep has no value, then this must be the greatest evolutionary blunder biology has ever made. And it's fascinating the extent to which many groups within our society simply dismiss sleep. It's regarded as an indulgence, a luxury, or perhaps even a disease that needs a cure. And indeed, the most obvious of our 24-hour rhythms is our sleep-wake rhythm. But as we'll also discuss, sleep-wake is much more than the biological clock that underpins these circadian rhythms. What do I mean by that? I mean rhythms that persist under constant conditions. So if you or I went to a deep dark cave, constant light and constant temperature, we'd still exhibit a 24, or not exactly, but a near 24-hour oscillation in these parameters. We see the most extraordinary tiny little structure here, and it's called the suprachiasmatic nuclei, or the SCN. It's often called the master clock. So those 50,000 neurons in the SCN are coupled together to form this sort of single block, this brain clock, if you like. But it's no use to have a clock which can anticipate and predict rhythmic events of the environment unless it's actually set to the external world. And for that, you need exposure to the light-dark cycle, which is detected exclusively in our species and all mammals by photoreceptors within the eye. Now, if we went and down to that deep dark cave where there was constant darkness, then, and also if we had no eyes, then what happens is the clock keeps on ticking, but the clock for most of us is slightly longer than 24 hours. So we would get up a little bit later and later and later and later each day. And so what light does is every cycle lock the internal day onto the external world. And that's why light is so critically important. So here we have age on this axis, and we've got morningness to eveningness on this axis here. And we see a beautiful change. So in women, men and women, from about the age of 10, you get an increase. They're going from more morning types into more evening types. In males, they go to bed later for longer. So they're peaking around about 21. In women, it's around about 19 and a half, and they're never as late as men. And then after the early 20s, there's a move to become more morning types. And what's interesting is that when you end up being towards your late 50s, early 60s, it's the first time since you were 10 that men and women are actually getting up and going to bed at about the same time. Now, this is on average, of course. Key information is lost if you only examine an average. And I think we've got to be much more sophisticated because of this breadth of morning types, evening types, and just variation across the piece in sleep. We can't just lump it all together and come up with an average. Here's a light-dark cycle, and here's dusk and here's dawn. And we know that sleep is normally aligned to the light phase. But light at dusk and dawn has different effects upon the clock. So dusk light delays the clock. You get up later the next day. Morning light advances the clock. You get up earlier the next day. So getting light at the exposure at the right time is really critical. If you happen to be going to bed really late and getting up really late, try and set the alarm clock, which gets you up early, get out there experiencing morning light, and it'll advance the clock. So there's something you can do about being a late type. Our ability to function during the consciousness state is utterly underpinned by a good sleep and what's going on within the brain whilst we sleep.